Ideas, Part 2. Where do they come from? That was Part 1. But how can we trust them? This is Part 2. In Part 1, we looked at classical models, recollection, abstraction from the senses, divine illumination, and emanation. Senses provide updates on a changing material world, while minds ponder immaterial truths from logic and math and other places. The problem, again, is how to get these two guys together. And here is an answer: an elaborate system known as the medieval synthesis: earth, water, air, fire, mineral, vegetable, animal, man, angel, and heavenly spheres. Everything and everyone in their place. On the good side, here is a way to make some sense out of the ever-increasing storehouse of practical, technical knowledge. On the downside, that sense oftentimes turns out to be nonsense. The correct intuition that harmonies and symmetries exist in nature becomes humors, alchemy, astrology. A brief example. Sunflowers came to Europe through the Columbian Exchange. They look like the sun. They track the sun in the sky. And everyone knows that the sun is associated with the heart and with the constellation Leo. But the new scientific revolution demands precision, both in measurements and in how relationships are defined. Because science is more than just a collection of facts. It's a way of thinking. And oh yeah, we are supposed to be thinking and talking about ideas. The classical view again: there's a form or species in nature that is expressed in the material, and through that matter is revealed to or truly reliably assessed by the senses. The received data is abstracted by the active intellect to uncover and reconstruct mentally that same form which is expressed physically in the world. It's a process watched over by a superintendent that both constructed human reason to know and constructed the world to be knowable. That is what allows the material to contact the immaterial here, and the immaterial to be expressed materially there. We fast forward now in our parade to Francis Bacon. Everything is connected, okay, but the real question is, how can we know and study it best? Here are his remarks on why flowers track the sun. Explain this not with natural magic and sympathies, but with swelling and extending due to the amount of moisture absorbed from the air. Physical changes in the stock. Descartes has a more extreme suggestion. For certainty and knowledge, we cannot look to the senses, for the simple fact that they could be deceptive and are often deceived. Descartes imagined a demon feeding him lies or hallucinations. No, we cannot capital K know through the senses, but we can definitely doubt the senses. 100% certain about that, I think. Therefore, I am moving on, or Descartes is moving on, to invent analytic geometry, more math, and prove God's existence, maybe, and offer a 4-step method, which we'll talk about later. These guys were all about methodology, and in this case, it's called rationalism based on reason. Another writer from another country, John Locke, saw experience, not reason, as the true path to knowledge. Locke's empiricism embraced sense data, the world as we experience it, the atoms, the building blocks of knowledge, the foundation of an experimental psychology. I picture it like a nightclub where all these experiences come walking in and they interact and mingle. Who knows what is going to happen, but no innate ideas allowed. That's how Locke's blank slate differs from Aristotle's unwritten tablet from Part 1. Nothing in the intellect except what comes through the senses. But then someone mutters, except the intellect itself. So it's a debate. But hey, speaking of parties, let's take a look at what is happening here. But what is happening here? Well, how would we find out? Socrates would interview each student, asking them questions about the good life, about whether there are multiple virtues or only one, and whether virtue could be taught. But with Aristotle, we begin to get organized. The question, what is it, can be answered 4 ways, the 4 causes: material, efficient, formal, and final. If it were a statue, we could say that marble, through chiseling into the shape of a woman, can beautify the temple. And in this case, students, because the music was turned on, are dancing to celebrate the end of the semester. But Aristotle did not stop there. Let's use his 10 categories to take a look at the student in the center. The substance is Jeremy. That's the primary substance. Humanity would be a secondary substance. quantity, about 45 pounds in that person there. Contrast that with music, which has no weight but is everywhere in the room somehow. Quality, description, rock star, obviously. Relation, in the middle of the circle. Place, in a classroom. Time, about 3 p.m. on the last day of school. Posture, dancing. Condition, cargo shorts, which are sensible and should be worn. What's he doing? Releasing mental energy from the intense school year. Affectation, feeling the beat. It's like the prompts in a journalist's notebook to get as complete a description as possible so that our minds can form as accurate a form as possible of what's happening. And I say that realizing that your answers are open to interpretation. That's not necessarily a bad thing because you are a good, skilled reporter. But that allowance for subjectivity, observes Francis Bacon, has gotten us maybe into some trouble. It's given us opportunities to fall for the traps that distort our thinking. What traps? Bacon offers 4 of them. The idols of the tribe, placing preconceptions onto the students. Just because other parties have happened in other classrooms in the past doesn't necessarily imply anything about what's happening in this specific case. Preconceptions are cheap. It's the observations, the data that matter. Idols of the cave. If you like dancing, you might assume that everyone is having a great time. Maybe, but maybe not. Idols of the marketplace. Dancing, music, classroom. Those words, dancing, music, classroom, those words seem non-controversial, but they've meant many different things at many different times. Idols of the theater. Again, it matters who is doing the looking. The teacher who organized the party wonders if it's going well. The principal wonders if all school policies are being followed. Billy worries if this dance move is making him look silly. It matters who's looking at the situation. So thank you, Francis, for pointing out our many flaws. But now that we know not to put Descartes before the horse, let's see what his method is for what we should be doing. And here are 4 rules I'm quoting here from Professor Robinson. 1. Accept nothing is true except what presents itself with a clarity and a vividness that is irresistible. 2. Divide each problem into as many smaller steps as possible. 3. Work from the solution to the smallest step, up to ever larger and larger aspects of the problem so that finally you reach the general solution. 4. Test that general solution with persistence. Go after it hammer and tong, assuring yourself that it suffers no exceptions. Again, Descartes started with doubt, but he did not end there. And in those tests for step 4, these experiments, what kind of data are we looking for? Well, John Locke has something to say about that. About measuring primary qualities, such as shape, size, motion, and rigidity. Things he says are intrinsic to the matter, what it really, quote, really is. And not to be confused with secondary qualities like color, odor, taste, texture, cuteness. These are not hallucinations, but neither do they give us information about the objects themselves. Calling honey sweet does not say anything about what it really is, about its molecular structure. Sweet only refers to an effect that the honey has on us. You can see a distinction here that Locke is making between objective and subjective measurements, a distinction that Aristotle perhaps was less interested in. Returning to the sunflower, we see Locke agreeing with Bacon. You say it looks like the sun? Well, no, it doesn't. The sun is a sphere. Those rays you think you see, they're just a mirage, a coincidence. And if the sunflower tracks the sun, the explanation, if it is to be an explanation, is not just mechanical, but it is chemical. It is atomic. What about color? Well, he didn't know about wavelengths, but that should be a primary quality, right? Because we perceive wavelengths. Well, not so fast. Consider the color magenta. It is not a wavelength of light. It is not on the rainbow. It results from how your color vision works. The human eye has 3 different cones, each sensitive to a different wavelength of light. When all 3 cones are activated, white light is perceived. When the red and blue cones are activated but not the green, then your brain sees or constructs magenta. And I'm convinced, totally convinced, that we need to be skeptical about both our senses and our ideas, trusting neither one naively. But how then, returning to our topic, how can we trust any of our ideas? How can the immaterial and the material worlds get together? Listen, all I said is don't be naive. Senses still carry valid data, ideas can still be true, and also we know that these worlds have to come together. That's according to Newton's law of universal gravitation, expressed with all the perfection of mathematics and tested and retested with ever more precision. Law-like, predictable behavior in the cosmos. But what about the classroom? Any ideas here? Any good ones? Or maybe we should admit defeat? Admit that we just can't know. That is the topic for part 3.